Alright, this is my fifth and final game that I'm analyzing for Eric, at least for now. Another correspondence game. Here Eric played the black pieces. Game opened with d4. d6 was played. A little passive. I think that d4 or knight f6 would have been those are probably the best two moves in the position. I usually play d5, but knight f6 is good too. Problem with d6, it allows, if white wants to play e4, he can, which is fine. It kind of morphs into can morph into a perk defense, but you're just giving white a lot of options. You could play c4, you could just play knight f3. But it's definitely not bad. You could play this way with the idea of g6 and then fianchettoing the bishop. Here white plays knight c3, h6 was played again. Probably knight f6 would have been better. Maybe here black was afraid of getting doubled pawns or something, but it's not really a big deal. It's better just to get your pieces out, and if people want to trade bishops for knights, it's generally not a big deal. Certain openings can be kind of tricky, like the Ruy Lopez on the black side, because there's a pawn, the central e5 pawn is under attack. But in d4 games, especially, it's really not a big deal. Not as much of a big deal for black to lose a knight for bishop. But anyway, h6 was played, knight f3, bishop g4. Generally, knights before bishops is a rule of thumb, because you don't necessarily know where the bishops want to go. Bishop this might be the best square for it, but it might want to go here. It might even want to come here to block a check. Whereas the knights usually are going to go to f3, c3, c6, f6. Sometimes they might want to come here, or tuck in here after the pawns move, or sometimes even come to the rim. But generally, especially for beginners, it's better to bring the knights out first, because there's fewer. It's kind of you know the plans for them quicker. But bishop g5, it's not the end of the world though. d5, kind of a strange move. Here white should get on with his own development, probably play e4, and he's got a really solid center. But he played d5. Bishop takes knight again, probably better. You know, you're not being threatened to do it, so you can kind of hold that threat over his head, and he can't even come here attacking you. So you could just kind of sit there and there's a saying in chess: the threat is stronger than the execution. And yeah, it's a good thing to remember that don't break the tension if you don't have to. Kind of keep, it's like just give him another thing to worry about. Once you take right away, you're kind of breaking the tension, and now that's one less thing he's got to worry about. He plays g takes. E takes probably would have been better. That would have opened up his light squared bishop, and g takes creates an isolated pawn. But it's not the end of the world. Knight f6. It's got to be the best move, bringing the knight out. e4. So now white's got a pretty solid looking center here. Although with c6, black can chip away at it. But here a6 was played. Again, a little passive. Again, I don't know exactly why it was played, but perhaps to defend against the check here. But again, that's not really that big a deal. The knight can come in and block, or even c6 can be played. So a6 wasn't absolutely necessary. c6 or even g6 with the idea of fianchettoing the bishop and then castling to safety, or developing the last knight probably would have been a little better. But anyway, a6 was played. Bishop f4 was played. g5 hitting the bishop, which kind of risky, especially if you want to castle queenside. Pushing these kingside pawns. Bishop g3. According to Fridge, bishop e3 would have been stronger. Now the knight this knight's the only piece that's been developed, and it's moving again, hitting the bishop. So probably better to get the other knight out, or fiend shadow the bishop in this case. But anyway, knight h5, bishop d3, knight takes g3, f takes g3. So now white's pawns are fixed. H takes also would have been possible, developing the knight. Developing the rook. Now you say, oh, it's a pawn move. How is it developing the rook? Well, rooks just like to be on open files, or in this case, half open files. So even though the rook didn't move, it can be considered developed. White might bring his queen here and castle queenside. Also, keep in mind if there was a dark squared bishop, if white still had a dark squared bishop, he could do a pseudo sacrifice for this pawn, and then if the h pawn took, the rook would be captured. So always just things to keep in mind. But f takes was played. Bishop g7, good move. f4, probably not the best. White can kind of just ignore it by playing c6 here, kind of busting up white's strong center. But bishop takes c3. I probably wouldn't play that. This is a really good bishop now in the long diagonal, threatening this pawn if the knight moves, and maybe even this rook. So I wouldn't trade it in this position. B takes. Now knight. Let's see. Oh, G takes. Fritz actually recommends G takes f4. G takes f4. Then the knight out. And then e5. Just again, kind of getting control. Oh, after e5. Oh, right, the threat. Now white's pawns are kind of busted up. So the threat is to deprive castling after this, and this is kind of a drawish position, where black's got some advantage in that white's pawns are messed up here. You might say, well, is that really something to strive for? Well, sometimes just if you're in kind of a passive cramped position, just breaking it open and getting an even endgame is fine. And if you study your endgames, you won't be afraid at all to get to an endgame. But knight d7 was played, which isn't bad. White castled. Again, c6 busting up the pawn chain, threatening checks maybe. Probably the best. But knight c5 was played, threatening the bishop. However, white now can get an attack going after queen h5, and probably one of these pawns is going to drop. White's threatening to take this pawn with mating threats on the f file. Black can't castle queenside to safety. According to Fritz, well, Fritz has got a couple moves. One of them is g4, just sacking the pawn, but preventing white from getting his rook involved, and or rook g8 is another possibility. But castling is kind of you're just going straight into the fire. F takes g5, h takes g5 leads to mate. Queen e8 is the only chance here. Well, actually, there's a few moves. Even now, c6 can be played, but queen e8. And idea is that now, if pawn takes, the king can hide in the corner. And white still has an overwhelming advantage, but at least black's not going to get mated here. Taking the pawn. Well, this actually leads to mate in 3 after queen takes. King moves to the corner. Now, if white tries to do a discovered attack now, black will just take the bishop. So rook over. Now mate in 1 is inevitable, actually. f6 was played here, and yeah, mate. This is mate. Yep, yeah, that's mate there. So, but white doesn't see it and plays queen h5 first. But now it's still mate. So the moral is, yeah, you got to be really, really careful moving your kingside pawns, and always be careful of you know, the queen coming out to here, especially when there's no knight, when you've lost your kingside knight. It's yeah, I mean, kingside attacks can jump up on you fast. I've had many a game where I've just gotten blown away, gotten mated, you know, move 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and it's really frustrating. But over time, defending, in my opinion, it's almost as satisfying, maybe sometimes more so than attacking. Just having a guy throwing everything at you and just hunkering down, maybe castling the opposite way, even if you drop a pawn or two, and then just counterattacking. It's very satisfying. So don't despair. I hope this was an instructive video. It's like 3:30 in the morning, so if I'm kind of faltering a little bit, I'm kind of tired, not the best video ever. I hope you enjoyed it anyway. Alright. Oops.